So I'm Margaret Sullivan, and I'm a journalist, and I've written a book called Newsroom Confidential: Lessons and Worries from an Ink-Stained Life. Well, I wrote this book because I thought I had an interesting story to tell. I wrote one book before, and I was really pleased with the way it was received, but it was a small academic press book. So I wanted to write kind of a bigger, more ambitious book. And because I had had some interesting things happen to me in my career, from being the first woman editor of my hometown paper, where I started as a summer intern and worked my way up, to being the public editor of the New York Times, which is like an internal watchdog in their newsroom, to being a columnist at the Washington Post during the years when Trump was happening. I thought that there could be some interesting stories there, and also some interesting lessons to draw from it in the wider world of journalism. Well, you know, when I think about what I went through as a young journalist, I think I was driving so hard. I was ambitious and I was very focused on work, and I think that was all good, but maybe I would tell myself that there's a little bit more time to achieve things and not to be quite so much in a hurry. I was just, you know, really pushing hard. And I don't regret that, but I think that I probably caused myself a little bit more anxiety than I needed to. Well, I think that, you know, journalism is a tough field, and it's gotten a little bit harder because the business model is so different than what it used to be. So I think you have to be really passionate about it, and you have to be willing to move around, and you have to be willing to do things that are maybe not exactly what you thought you would be doing as your first or second job, and then kind of, you know, negotiate your way in. So I would say flexibility and learning a lot of different skills, like learn how to shoot video, learn how to do the audio side of things, cover different beats. Like, don't just say to yourself, well, I want to be the dance critic for the New York Times. I mean, try to cast a little bit of a wider net and see where it all leads. One of the sort of odd things that I used as research for my book was I had been keeping journals since I was 10 years old. So when I was 10, my dad, who was a lawyer, came home from the office and handed me one of those, just a calendar with blank pages for each day. And I didn't really have a lot to put on my calendar as a 10-year-old, but I decided to use it as a journal. And then he brought me the one for the next year. So, and then of course I started buying like cool journals and all kinds of different things, but I have stacks of these journals right up to the present. So I used those, not always, you know, in any exclusive way, but I did use them sometimes to refresh my memory, or even to be able to quote people directly, because I would have written down exactly what they said on that day. So I guess if you're in the FBI, you would call that contemporaneous notes, but when you're 10 years old, you're not really thinking in those terms. Well, I know a lot of reporters and even editors who are significantly younger than I am, who I think are really great. So, you know, David Farenthold, who's a reporter who was at the Washington Post and is now at the New York Times, is a reporter I admire. Stead Herndon, who's at the Times, is somebody I think is really great. Nicole Hannah-Jones at the New York Times Magazine is someone I admire. There are people at ProPublica, at the Marshall Project, at a lot of the small digital startups. The editor of the Texas Tribune, who's a guy named Sewell Chan, is somebody I admire. And then there are editors who actually have been around for a long time, and reporters who I look up to and I think are great, who are still, you know, hanging in there and kicking around. So I guess it does kind of transverse, if that's the right word, the generations. So I know a lot of young people and a lot of older people who I admire a lot. I also have kept track of the careers of a few young people who I guess you could say I've mentored them a little bit, and I have kind of a close relationship with. One is my nephew, who was a reporter at The Hill and is now at Axios. And then my son's former girlfriend, who is a TV reporter at WRAL in Raleigh. Oh, another one is my daughter's former NYU roommate, whose name is Sophie Kleeman, who's at Business Insider. I guess they call themselves Insider now. And she's an investigations editor. So all these people have done really well, and they're not doing it in the sort of traditional come up through small newspapers and get to a larger newspaper way. But they're finding their own paths, and I admire their work a lot. I'm hoping, first of all, that readers will just enjoy reading the book. I picked up a couple pieces of advice along the way. One was actually on Twitter, and one was from a friend. And my friend, who's an author, just said in passing, you have to make it gorgeous. And when she said that, I realized, like, the writing really has to hold up. You know, it has to have its moments of being really, really strong. And the other piece of advice, which again, I think I got this just from somebody spouting off on Twitter, was the more you sweat, the less you bleed. And I think that's from boxing. And the idea is, you know, the more you work, the work you put into it will make it better and will reduce the errors, will make it more bulletproof. The more you sweat, the less you bleed. So I hope that those things come across, that people could say, wow, this is well written, and also that it has a message to impart about journalism at its best, how important it is, and how journalists need to be at their best, especially right now when democracy is on the brink in the United States and we can't just be complacent about it. Thanks a lot for watching, and my book, Newsroom Confidential, is publishing on October 18th, and I'm very excited. I hope you'll like reading it.